What if I'm just not good enough? What if they call me a fraud when I do the thing I want to do? What if everybody figures out the fact that I just don't know what I'm doing? Hello, this is Imposter Syndrome, and girl, we all deal with this all the time. What I just said literally goes through my brain all the time when it comes to this podcast, when it comes to my teaching, when it comes to my writing, when it comes to my whole business. And I've been doing this business for years and years and years, over a decade. So in this week's episode, we're going to look at what it is, what imposter syndrome is, what it means, like about what it means you should be doing, and how the heck to keep it from stopping you from doing awesome things in your life. Welcome to Explore Your Enthusiasm, episode 233 with me, Tara Swiger. Guess what? I'm 233 episodes into this podcast and 4 years into doing it, and I am still worried I'm not good enough. I got a bad review earlier this week, and I'm just going to be honest with you. My first thought was, oh my gosh, they found me out. They're right. Everything mean that they said about how I sound and my voice is drilling into their head is true. Everybody thinks this. Everybody's always think this. This must be why 2,000 people listen to each episode, is because they're right. I'm not good enough. Thankfully, I took a minute. I thought through what I would say to a client, a friend, a starship captain, and I realized, hold up, this is imposter syndrome. This is not fact. This is the imposter syndrome. It might be fact for this one reviewer, but that doesn't mean it's fact about me. It's not the truth about me. So I hopped on Instagram stories. I talked about just like processing through it. And sure enough, you all feel the same way. You all commented, oh my gosh, I get worried people are going to call me a fraud. I get worried people aren't going to like me. This is what stops me from doing the things I want to be doing because I don't want to get a review like that. So I actually did a little question pop-up on my stories, and I got more responses to the question about imposter syndrome than I've ever gotten to anything I've ever put on stories. So you guys told me you wanted to know, what the heck is imposter syndrome? Why does it keep popping up? Does it mean something about like if I'm good enough or not? And above all, what can we do to move past it? How do we stop it from stopping us? So that's what we're going to talk about in today's episode. This actually came up because a local friend messaged me, do you have a podcast episode on imposter syndrome? She just got a new awesome job offer that she's been wanting for over a year. She's more than qualified. And she told me, yay, I got the job. And I said, yay. And she said, do you have a podcast episode about imposter syndrome? And I searched and I realized, no, I don't. So we're going to talk about it. So what is imposter syndrome? I think Wikipedia explains it pretty darn well because they reference the first study that was done in 1978 discovering imposter syndrome. So Wikipedia says imposter syndrome, which is also known as the imposter phenomenon, imposterism, fraud syndrome, or imposter experience, is a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their accomplishments and has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. In her book, The Art of Asking, Amanda Palmer calls this the fraud police. You know, I think the fraud police are going to knock down your door. Wikipedia goes on that says, despite external evidence of their competence, ability to do something, those experiencing this phenomenon remain convinced that they're frauds. They do not deserve all that they have achieved. Individuals with imposterism incorrectly attribute their success to luck. Or as a result of deceiving others into thinking that they're more intelligent than they perceive themselves to be. Does that sound like anything you've ever done? That you attribute your success to either just random luck or to everyone being fooled and they're really going to discover you're a fraud? Girl, no. So what does it mean when you feel this imposter syndrome? What is it telling you? Guess what? It's telling you that you're human, that you are challenging yourself to do something you're afraid of doing or that you haven't done before or that no one else has given you permission to do. You worry you're not good enough because you haven't proved it to yourself yet, or you haven't proved it to others, or it's entirely possible you've proved this a million times and you're just not giving yourself the credit for having proved it already that you can do it. In other words, it doesn't mean that you should not do the thing. It doesn't mean you should stop what you're doing. It is not a sign. If it's a sign of anything, it's a sign that you're a human being living in the world. Congratulations. Now, how do you get rid of it? How do you deal with it? This is what we all want to know. We're like, yeah, I feel imposter syndrome all the time. It doesn't mean anything, but how do I get rid of it? So I actually looked at the research around this. There has been some psychological research around imposter syndrome, and this is what will work according to the studies. Number one, recognize that you're feeling it and that you're not alone. So first, you have to recognize imposter syndrome for what it is. This step alone can dramatically change the impact that it has on you and the actions you take. Because by naming it, you realize it's just a faulty way of thinking that's extremely common, but it's not fact about your skills and abilities. So how do you start recognizing it? How do you start naming it? How do you not just let it take you away and it feels like fact? So the first thing is to notice when you're backing away from something or you're stressing about something or the thought pops into your head. These are all trigger things that should make you say imposter syndrome. If it pops up into your head, I'm not good enough for this. I don't deserve this, whether it's something you've received or something you're working towards receiving, like some goal you're working on reaching. Fraud. Everybody's going to find out. Those are all keywords that say, that's imposter syndrome. So also, if you're just like not working on something because you think you're not good enough and you haven't even used the phrase not good enough yet, it's just you keep backing away from something, ask yourself, what am I afraid of right now? And what am I afraid others will say? Now, if your answer is I'm afraid, if the question, why am I afraid, shows you that you're afraid of someone calling you a fraud, someone judging you, if you're afraid of not being good enough, if you're afraid of failing because you're not good enough, that is a key insight that is imposter syndrome. So when you feel that, when you come up with those answers, all you have to do is say to yourself, it's okay to feel this way. It's okay to be afraid. I can do it anyway. One of the favorite things that pops up in my head is years ago, Jess, who was my VA at the time, Jess Cook, she sent me a thing from Emily McDowell's shop, which was just a sticker. It's a quote of Joan of Arc, I am not afraid, I was born to do this. I will literally say to myself over and over, I am not afraid, I was born to do this. I used it, she sent it to me when I did my first Creative Live class. I've used it when I'm parenting. I use it before I do any speeches or talks or publish a new book. I'm not afraid, I was born to do this. Now the fact is, I am afraid, that's okay, but I was born for this. In other words, I am deserving, worthy enough for this. So even if you can't quite say I'm not afraid or you don't quite feel like you're good enough, just say it's okay to feel this way, it's okay to be afraid, I can do it anyway. So imposter syndrome is just those fears. The thing is, it's important to realize it's not necessary, like just because you're afraid of it doesn't mean that it's true. There's a big gap between being actually bad at something, being judged at being bad at something, and being afraid of being judged at being bad at something. In my experience, far more people are afraid of being judged at being bad at something that are actually going to be judged or that are actually bad. So you realize that, right? Like this is just my fear about it. It doesn't mean that it's true. And the good news is studies show that just naming it can help reduce the effect of imposter syndrome. So in a 1978 paper, which first identified this, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes first identified imposterism in their paper. Their paper's titled Imposter Phenomenon in High Achieving Women. I've got this linked up in the show notes, which you can scroll down and see, or you can go to tarswiger.com/podcast 233 and you'll find this whole original article that identified imposterism. But what they found, they concluded that simply extracting the self-doubt before an event occurs helps eliminate the feelings of imposterism. That's a quote from them. So extracting the feelings of self-doubt, identifying, noticing the self-doubt can help eliminate the feelings of imposterism. Now here's the other half that you need to keep in mind. An estimated 70% of people experience these imposter feelings at some point in their lives, according to an article published in the International Journal of Behavioral Science, which of course I have linked up in the show notes. So 70% of people. In other words, you are not alone. So Clance and Imes also found that the realization they were not the only ones who experienced these feelings helped reduce the feelings. So literally, I need you to say to yourself, this is imposter syndrome. It's okay that I have this self-doubt. Over 70% of people feel like this at some point in their life. Or if you can't remember the number, just say most people Those two things help eliminate the effect that imposter syndrome is going to have on you. That's pretty great, right? You don't have to go to therapy. You don't have to work through all your childhood issues. You need to identify the feeling as imposter syndrome, and then you need to remind yourself you're not alone in it. So, recognize the feelings and realizing you're not alone helps eliminate the feelings. Now, you could just do that, move on with your life, but I've got two more things I want you to do. The second one is grow your self-worth. So here's the thing, with so many of you, and I was just having a conversation with Jolie for our podcast, Take Care of Yourself. You can listen to that on iTunes or YouTube. It's called Take Care of Yourself with Jolie and Tara. She's talking about not valuing the things that she's naturally good at. We all do this. I brought it up because so many of you tell me, oh, I'm good at X, but that's not really worth that much. Or that's not a big deal. Or so what? It comes easy. But doing that devalues what you're great at. And most of us do it because we think that if it comes easy to us, it must come easily to other people. We kind of subconsciously believe that, but that's not true, right? I feel like talking into this podcast and the videos that I'm doing are just me talking this podcast out that I wrote. I feel like thinking, writing, talking this podcast is like not that valuable. Anybody could do it. But in fact, many of you tell me you couldn't do it. So I've got a value that is worth something, which will increase my feelings of self-worth. If you devalue what you're good at and comes naturally, you're going to think you're not worth much because you're not going to put a lot of value to the things that you already do naturally. Instead, you're always going to be striving and grasping to get better at the things that don't come as easily to you, and that will make you feel bad all of the time. So in times of high imposter syndrome, which you're likely to feel, let me just tell you, you're likely to feel more imposter syndrome when you're new in a new experience, whether that's a new parenting experience or it's a new work experience or it's a new relationship experience. You're likely to feel higher imposter syndrome when it's a new experience, when you're being challenged. So maybe it's the same old job, but there's a new challenge, or when you need to be vulnerable or authentic. You're going to likely feel more imposter syndrome, which would explain why in our era of social media, we're all feeling this so much, because social media, in order to be effective and really connect, requires a level of vulnerability and authenticity. So when you're in times of high imposter syndrome, you can do a few things to boost your self-worth. I want you to take note of these, even though you'll find all of my notes here, all of this written out over on the show notes, taraswiger.com/podcast233. So this is what you'll do. Pick one of these 4 things. Start keeping a list of what you're good at, what others compliment you for, what comes easily to you. I'm good at talking like this live on camera. It feels silly to say it. It doesn't feel like a skill, but it has built my whole business, so I have to acknowledge it. Next, maybe you don't want to keep a list, or as you're keeping your running list, keep a folder full of nice reviews or comments or emails you've gotten. I have a email folder that's very old called Big Love. I put all of the nice things you guys email me in that folder. Sometimes those emails, because they go through the contact form on my page, go to Holly. Holly puts them in a conversation on Asana, so I can just go there and read through it. This is why I ask you to leave iTunes podcast reviews, because it helps drown out any mean reviews I get. Both drown out like for me in my own head, but also just like on the show page. So if you haven't left an iTunes podcast review, go do that. And then start a folder where you keep all of your nice reviews and comments in one place. 3, list all of the times you were new at something or you were afraid of something and it turned out fine. Now, at first I wrote this that you succeeded, but here's the thing. Are there things you were new at that you failed at that were still fine? Were there things that you felt nervous about that you failed at and were still fine? I am always nervous about my voice, about talking too fast, about not sounding right on this podcast. I got the bad review, so let's say that's a failure, right? I didn't make every single person happy all the time, and yet it's fine. So that goes on my list. I got a bad review and I was fine about it. Now, if it had happened 4 years ago, I probably wouldn't have been fine about it, but that's the joy of doing something for a long time, building up your self-worth and proving to yourself you can do something for a long time. It becomes easier and easier to slough off the imposter syndrome when it shows up. Now, the third way that you can deal with imposter syndrome is to reframe your reasons to an intrinsic motivation. So, researcher Queena Hong which what a great name is that, found that moving your reasons for doing something from external reasons, external motivation, to internal motivation lessens the impact of imposter syndrome. I'm going to explain what that means. She published her results in a paper called The Imposter Phenomenon: Overcoming Internalized Barriers and Recognizing Achievements. So what it means is an external reason for doing something is I have to do this. Someone told me to do this. You need to change it to an internal reason, and the imposter syndrome isn't going to be as great. So changing it from I have to do this to I want to do this for me goes from external to internal. Some other examples are, if I want this business to succeed, I need to keep going. Another example is, I know I can do this. You're focusing on you and not on other people. So your external motivation might be, I'm afraid other people will judge me. That's externally focused. Internally focused is, I know I can do it. Another thing she mentions is changing your motivation for the greater good, for your internal motivation for the greater good. For example, I'm doing this for women everywhere, or I am advancing in this way because no one who looks like me has before. So it's this last one that most helps me and most helped me in my recent flash of imposterism. So I realized that if I let the reviewers who don't like my voice silence me, then I am implicitly saying to all of you, to the world at large, that you deserve to be silenced if people don't like you. Which is pretty much the opposite of what I believe. I believe everyone, especially communities who have been traditionally silenced, should share their voice, their art, their expression, where others, especially others in the dominant culture, approve of it or not. That we all humans, should not be silenced by critics. Right? There's a great FDR quote, it's not the critic who counts, it's the man who's in the arena. So someone who just randomly comments on your stuff, their voice doesn't count. It's you who are out there, who are doing the work, who are putting your work out there. Your opinion counts for yourself. That's internalized motivation. So next time imposter syndrome rears its head in your life, I want you to look at what listening to the imposter syndrome, what falling for the imposter syndrome will communicate to the world at large. What will it communicate to your children, to your friends, to your family, to everyone else? Will you be willing to send the message that you have to be perfect in order to succeed? Do you have to reach utter perfectionism before you can get ahead? Will you communicate to our daughters that unless they have unshakable confidence and always believe in themselves, that they shouldn't take one step towards their dream? No. So you need to move forward for all of us, despite your imperfection, despite your lack of confidence, despite feeling like a fraud. You need to move forward anyhow. I hope that these strategies help you overcome your imposter syndrome, but above all, I want you to remember you can feel like an imposter and do it anyway. Isn't that the message we want to teach everyone who comes in contact with us? That you can be afraid and do it anyway, that you don't have to feel perfect and do it anyway. You don't have to have the confidence. You can choose to do it anyway. So don't wait around for confidence. Don't wait around for your imposter syndrome to go away. You do not have to get rid of it completely, but learn to act despite it. So I want to hear what you are doing despite your imposter syndrome. Come and tell me what you do, even though you don't feel perfect or you don't feel worthy. Come tell me over on Instagram. Use the hashtag #ExploreYourEnthusiasm and tag me. I'm at Tara Swiger, and I want to see what you're doing despite imposter syndrome. If this episode helped you, please let me know. Share it with friends and family, because 70% of us feel this way. So share it. I'm sure your friends and family feel it too. Thank you so much for listening, and I wish you a confident, action-filled day full of enthusiasm.